Today's Mussar lesson is on the word or on the concept of order. We know that in the Passover Seder, what does Seder mean? Order. And it's the Hebrew word for order is Seder. So we're going to be talking about what this order is and how we are to master it. Now look, we know that on the surface, each one of the tips of Mussar had both ends of the perspective. When it comes to being frugal, or you can be stingy. And there's a balance between the two. If you were going to think order, what would be the worst possible scenario on the stringent side of order? What would you consider that?
Strict.
Well, yeah, but what would it look like? What would it be? Very strict, obsessive, compulsive, right? Is that healthy? No, it's not. It does. If anything, like you said, it'll actually cause chaos in people's lives. When, well, yeah, absolutely. I forgot the name of the guy that he was a famous actor, but he had OCD really bad. And while they were interviewing him, he's brushing the ends of the rug, like the tassels, to make sure they were all straight. And he had a special comb that he would do it with. And it was like he had to do it. I knew someone that when he shut a door, he had to always open and shut it 6 times before he could leave. It was just this obsessive compulsiveness. We're not talking about that kind of thing, but we are talking about that as the manic side of order, in which everything has to be so tucked in place that you actually bring chaos into everybody's life. That's one side. What would be the opposite, total opposite end of that? Just nothing. No organization, complete lackadaisical attitude, no focus, frustration. And my wife has a philosophy that says that if you want to order your day, get up and make your bed. And it's made sense to just get up and make your bed, and it kind of helps to get things set properly. And I think of all things in Judaism, you would think that, well, that's the last thing that anybody in Judaism, any problem that they would have, because their life is so ordered. But there are people that maybe their whole sort of religious life is very much in order, but everything else is in shambles. Now, as we go through the process and talk about this, we know that there's always a physical component, and those are great for us to pursue. But as for this class, our focus is going to be bringing order to your spiritual life, and obviously it would affect the physical. Those who possess order in their lives really become a beacon of people around them. It's a trait, is also coupled with faithfulness and the ability to stay on task. And those who embody order have action, task, and just an orderly nature. They you can depend on them. They have things together. Everything has a set time and place. And first, a person should put his house together, according to Rabbi Israel Salanter. He says, first, a person should put his house together, then his town, then his world. You can't change the world without first making your bed, according to Peter, what's his name? Dr. Jordan Peterson, thank you very much. The sole trait of order, or siddur, as we said before, clearly and concretely embodies the Mussar teaching that encourage us to seek the middle way. When there is when there's little order, the result is chaos, and the other end of the range, too much order gives rise to obsessive rigidity, and best in order lies between the two extremes. So once again, when we're talking about order, we're not talking about the opposite ends. We're talking about right down the middle. The book of Numbers begins with the instructions to count the certain segments of the Jewish society. If you remember, they were to divide themselves into tribes, and according to each one of their banners, and each member of the tribe had elders that would set up, and they would count the numbers, and they were in specific positions in the camp. The Kohanim were in the center, They were with the tabernacle, and then around them were the rest of the Israelite people. A person could not choose where they wanted to live in the camp. They had to have to be with their family. This is about order. Torah is nothing but a book of order and precision, about putting things in order and bringing order to chaos. What have we been talking about in this last week's parsha on Genesis? It was about the creator of the universe from nothing creates. From absolute nothing and absolute chaos brings order within a short period of time. We talk about the 6 days of creation and how everything was created with absolute precision for the purpose of mankind when he put him on the earth. When Adam and Eve was put on earth, everything was in order and was ready to go. The section of the Torah with its images of well-ordered camps have offered much of the inspiration to the great Mussar teachers of the world. They have drawn from the lesson from this example that order is practical, necessary, and more, it is a spiritual value deriving from the Word of God. So we cannot get away from the fact that the Torah teaches us about order. This reflects the emphasis on order. If we can find a wider Jewish tradition, the word for order, Siddur, shows up directly in the name given to the Passover. It is the order. There is a way that things should be laid out. Because all creation runs on orderly principles, it is said to be Mussar, orderly, and therefore Torah, which is the blueprint of the world, is Mesudar, M-E-S-U-D-A-R as well. Any one person who has tried to organize a group of people, you understand the frustration that can pursue. Right? It's like, have you ever heard the expression of trying to herd cats? Right? We've heard that, right? Melanie teaches 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, and I don't know how she does it. She comes home smiling. I don't know how that happens. I wonder if she's drinking something while she's there, but she does it. It's like ordering cats. They're just all over the place. They're in their own little world. But adults could be the same thing, same way. So the idea is to create order. The opposite of creating order is to let things sort of randomly fall into place. Like, hey, we're just going to show up and see what happens. Well, we all know what that's like. Could you imagine us developing a community in which you show up and we might start at 4:15 or 6:45? How long would you keep coming back if that was the case? You wouldn't come back long. The whole idea is there's got to be balance. I know this one of the things that one of the rabbis, and actually a couple, have spoken and said about NETIV, that when they came here, everything had a purpose in what we were doing. Everything had a focus. The way the room was set up, the way the classes start on time, it was focused that way. And I told them, this is not an accident. This is actually practiced. And it's the same thing for anything. It's for business, whether you're in the medical field, whether you're doing websites, it doesn't matter. Whether you're doing IT work, there's a process. And if you don't have order to the process, you'll never, ever succeed. I think absolutely you missed an important step. And let me tell you, a person that has order actually makes their job look easy. And people look at you and go, wow, man, I could do that. And you go, no, actually you can't. You can't make up your bed yet. Right? I mean, you don't want to be smart, Alec, but the whole point is, I could probably look at some of the things that Royce does and think, wow, I could probably do that. But if I don't have the mechanism of order that he has in constructing and doing the stuff he does in the world of internet technology, I'm lost. There's no way. Plus, I don't have the schooling to put it in my bag of order tricks. And so it takes a very special individual to be able to do that. Now, here is a challenge. Now, this is going to be a difficult thing, and this is where we need to bring it down to reality. There are some people who don't have within them or possess I don't know what you call it, the desire or the life skill to have a lot of order, say, for example, in their personal life. Like, I'm the type of guy that drives my car, and my wife fusses at me all the time, but the floorboard on the passenger side becomes the trash can. You know what I'm talking about? It becomes a trash can. And then about once every week or so, I'll pile it in a bag and throw it away. But it's like, I don't have time to go look for a garbage can. It's much easier just to go like this, right? Now, that is what I call manageable chaos, right? I throw the trash in the floorboard, and that's it. But if I'm really honest with myself, I need to ask, does that have a spiritual component? It may not. You understand? Is there a spiritual component? Is there some things that I know I should discard, that I don't discard it properly, and I just kind of chunk it off to the side, wait till it piles up, and then I have to deal with it? I should ask myself that. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean that it is. A person who, for example, is, what do they call those? It was on TV a while back. A hoarder, right? That is a serious psychiatric condition. But a person who's a hoarder, they should ask themselves the question, what am I holding on to? And what is going on in my spiritual life that is causing me to do that? Because even though we would like to think, well, there's no connection between physicality and spirituality. But we find out in Judaism that's not the case. There is a direct connection between physicality and spirituality. And so if there is any level of chaos in your life that lacks order, that creates frustration, that causes you to not be able to achieve your task and goals, then it's time to put some order. Why? Because if you order yourself physically, then spiritually it'll be easier to order yourself, and vice versa. If you order yourself spiritually, then there becomes a bit of a motivation to order yourself physically. The serious concern, though we talk about ordering physicality, the inner order or disorder, which sets the template for our outer lives. We can try all of our best, for example, for me not throwing my trash in the floorboard, but I need to look at the real issue, if there is one that's spiritual. Does that make sense? Now, there may not be, but I really seriously need to ask that, because that's the most important thing. Can you imagine standing before Hashem and say, well, I got rid of all the trash in my car. And he goes, but what about the trash that was in your mind, that you just deposited on the floorboard of your mind and you never really fully got rid of it? Those are the things that are very important. Picture chaos with stuff flying, piles of junk and clutter, thinking, clinging ruckus. Who could possibly hear the fragile voice of truth, of whispering in a tornado? Do you catch that? The mind. We're talking about the mind. Who could possibly hear the voice of God when it's rattling around with all kinds of rubbish thoughts of confusion, of pain, of suffering, of guilt, of shame? Help me, give me some other words. What's that? Distraction. All of these things become like a giant tornado. And I don't know about you, but this has been one of the big things about cleaning a desk, right? They always say a brilliant person has a messy desk, right? Have you heard that? Okay. Well, I tend to like to think I believe that, but the truth is, it's hard to clean up a desk once it gets to a certain critical place that it's like, oh man, I really am going to have to. And then when you get it finished, you're like, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal. But there's a critical place in which it becomes overwhelming. What I'm trying to say is we all need to examine when we get to that critical place and say, okay, it's time to stop, and slow down and declutter the mind. How is it possible to hear the whisper of Hashem to instruct us on what we need to do if we're too confused and too burnt out and too worried about what's going on? And in contrast, but equally disabling, where order has been taken to the point of extreme inflexibility. Do you see the two? How could you change? If so unbending your ways have become, The extremes of chaos and obsessive rigidity at opposite ends of the spectrum are both impediments. So let's talk about extreme rigidity. Let's look at it in a pathological sense. You know, there are people that if things aren't lined up a certain way, it's like they can't go beyond that without those things being lined up properly. And it's very pathological. There are also people who have such a rigid thinking that it freezes their ability to be able to move on in their relationship with Hashem. Maybe it's the rigidity of the fact that they're not able to perform at a certain level, and so what's the point? You know, they sort of freeze at that place. So that's a bad thing as well. It's like, I know people, and this is interesting because a person who has, let's say a person who has a messy house, cluttered with, hoarding stuff, has just as big a problem as a person who's so obsessive about a clean house. They both can freeze in their abilities to function normally in society. Well, let's look at our mind. Is it possible that in our mind we could be so rigid about our things that we really don't have the freedom to be able to have a relationship with Hashem because we're so rigid in our mind? Yes, absolutely. So it's important to look at this thing. There's a story that I love by Rabbi Eliyahu Dessler. He says that he said there are 3 reasons that we should put things in order. 3 reasons we should put things in order. And he used this as an example he'll tell later as like a pearl necklace. Order is good because knowing that things are well arranged creates a feeling of confidence, right? Things are well arranged and in order. Things seem to be a bit under control. Order helps us to find things when you need them and saves you time that would be lost in looking for them. And 3, some things will only work if they are ordered correctly. A machine's an example. Setting up a website, setting up a network system. If everything is in order, it'll work. But if you get one thing out of order, you get one bit of code not in the right proper place. I remember being so frustrated trying to find that one little piece of code that later on you go, oh, how could that little comma mess things up like that? Well and good, but Mussar is not the handmaiden to Martha Stewart, but the opposite. Let me explain what I'm saying. We're not trying to learn how the world brings order. We're not looking to Dr. Peterson to bring order to our lives. We want to understand this from a spiritual perspective. There must be more to understand and appreciate in the soul trait of order than just the practical as far as it is. We all love the practical. I'd love to give you 17 tips on how to have an organized garage. Just don't come to my house. The point is you understand. It's like, it'd be great. But the point, we're not here to try to build, like I said, a Martha Stewart Mussar class. There's a Mussar teacher, Rabbi Dessler, that I said earlier. Stature would be clearly emphasized. The practical dimensions in order reveal something about the nature of Mussar thing. We're not guided to seek a spirituality that is lifted off of the world, but rather the world should be lifting off of us what they should be doing in Mussar and bringing order. We're encouraged to seek spirituality within ways of the world. From this perspective, the order that you seek to create on your desk, your car, your clothes, your financial papers, your tools, your kitchen utensils, and so on is not just good management. It's also it is all spiritual work nonetheless. Now, Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe, do we know who he is? Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe, kin to the Wolbes, the grandfather, correct? Says in his name, it says in the name of the altar of Kelm, that order can be compared to the clasp on a pearl necklace. I love this. Pearls are what make the necklace. Without the clasp, the pearls will scatter, leaving only empty string. Similarly, A person contains an abundance of strength and intellect and character and traits and qualities, but without the siddur, the order, all these virtues will just scatter. It's useless. You talk about all the passion you have, but if you don't have order to put the passion there, it's not going to work. The Alter Kelm saw the Torah as being entirely based on the principle of order. After all, only one moment separates Shabbat from the weekday. One hair's breadth is the difference between a kosher and an unfit slaughter and a small quantity of water that could render a mikveh unfit, and so on and so on. It's that one little thing that separates the holy from the unholy. Order is important. The Kelm says the primary focus of Mussar practice was the cultivation of inner attitudes, and so external disorder was taken to be a reflection of internal disarray. A person who possessions are messy is like to have thoughts that are also jumbled. If he is not careful about the cleanliness of his house, he is also likely to be lax about the purity of his spirit. Now this sounds tough, but this is not coming from me, it's coming from the Alter of Kelm. There is an oft-repeated story that the Alter of Kelm once visited his son, then a student in a distant yeshiva. The first thing the father did was go visit his son's rooms before he saw him. When he saw his son's clothes all hanging up in order and his bed made and his shoes tucked properly on the bed, he knew he's doing good. You get it? It's a good observation. The Alter of Kelm's successor and his son-in-law, Rabbi Tzvi Brody, was a classic product of the attention to order that characterized Kelm. His daily timetable was arranged with almost military precision, and it was said that you could set your watch according to Rabbi Brody's comings and goings. Wow. Well, compare that to the rest of Israel right now. Don't set your clock to a contractor in Israel. How does our order affect everybody else? It is everything. You know, we have a saying that says, say, hey, Rod, are you going to, how you come over and meet me tomorrow? We'll have coffee at Starbucks. And I'll say, God willing, I'll be there at 2 o'clock. I'm not saying God willing as in, if I don't show up, you should blame God. We say God willing because we realize everything's by the will of God, but I'm going to be there. And if I tell you I'm going to be there at 2 o'clock, I'm going to show up. And if I can't show up, I'm going to give you a call. That's good business practice. I think for a long time, customer service has suffered because people, businesses have lost the attitude that I'm serving a customer. I need to keep them posted on what I'm doing. I was shocked the other day when I called and asked for someone to come by and take a look at something at my house. And they said, okay, they'll be in touch with you within the next 12 hours. And I'm thinking, good luck on that, right? And Johnny on the spot, I got a text from him within 12 hours saying, I'm going to be there on Monday between noon and 4. If you can do that, it's good for you. Send yes for yes in the text. I said, yes, I'll be there. And then I got a follow-up phone call from one of their people saying, hey, want to make sure you got the text. And did you respond? And I want you to know he'll be there. Now, do I have a doubt that he'll be there? Not now, because there was order in the process. And that is something that is, for a long time, has been missing. I think it's really coming back in our culture. I see it all the time, and it's really encouraging. It says that the Greenbergs, it's interesting. The Greenbergs have a special hook for the car keys. Here's the story. And the son, Mike, took the car, went to the library, comes back. He tells his dad, hey, I'm going to run down. I'm going to go get something to eat. I'm going to walk down to the restaurant. His mom comes in. She has to go to work. There's no keys, right? And they are looking all over the place. She woke her husband up. Where's the keys? I don't know. Mike has the car. No, he doesn't. The car's in the driveway. One of those things. Tear the house up, no keys. Frustrated, irritated, annoyed. She has to contact Uber to drive her to work. And then Mike comes home and goes, "Oh, I had the keys in my pocket the whole time." Right? So one time I was relaxing by the pool, and my wife locked me out of the house by accident. How many hours was that out there? Like 4 hours. And the thing is I wasn't planning on being out there 4 hours. And I had the neighbor kid behind was looking through the fence. Hi, I'm like, go away. Right? It was hot outside. It's like that's what happens when you just don't I should have told her, hey, make sure don't lock the door, but I didn't think about it. So those are the kinds of things that happens when we don't make sure we have things in order. What do we do when it's not part of our culture? There are some cultures that starting on time is not part of their deal. I can think of several cultures. Why are you looking at your husband like that?
Because it's a Hispanic thing.
No, it is a Hispanic thing, and I think it's an Israeli thing as well. I don't know the rest of Europe. Can you guys tell me? Right. If they say we're going to have a party, it starts at 4 o'clock, you might be lucky at 5. Right? But the point is if it's a cultural thing, can it necessarily be a spiritual thing? And I don't know. I think every person needs to ask themselves, say, look, because it's a cultural thing, I want to make sure that I'm not using this as an excuse on how I conduct my spiritual life, right? Like, oh, yes, I can hit the target or I don't have to hit the target. Because what is Torah? What is keeping and doing mitzvot? It's shooting the target and hitting it, right? Making the target. But it's possible if culturally you develop it like, yeah, if I show, if I don't, I don't. It'd be easy to finally get the attitude, I'll get it sooner or later. And that's not really good. So at the same time, though I can't address it, point on myself, because culturally I've not been raised that way. I also don't want to be judgmental by people who do have that in our culture, because it is just the way they operate. The Altar of Kelm taught that if a person were to be careless in his behavior, neither organized nor precise in his deeds, then he will also be confused in his thoughts and his opinions. That is a problem in itself, as chaotic thinking makes for difficult living. But even more important was the recognition that the inner and outer disorder interferes with our ability to serve God properly. You hear that? Inner and outer disorder can affect our ability to serve God. It is not an aggregation to say that the essential Jewish view of a well-lived life is one in which the role of being Eved Hashem, or a servant of God, has been perfected. Let me read you some scriptures in closing. Deuteronomy 34, verse 5, Moses is called as an Eved Hashem, a servant of God. The first line of the book of Joshua repeats this phrase again, calling Moses servant of God. Psalm 36 begins, to the chief musician, a psalm of David, the servant of the Lord. Leviticus 25:55, God says, for the children of Israel are servants to me, they are servants to whom I have redeemed from Egypt. To elevate the role of a servant to the pinnacle of spiritual life is about a counter-cultural notion. Bottom line, we're not in a culture in our country, if anything, we're the opposite, especially Texans. We're not anybody's servant, right? I'm independent. You don't tell me what to do. Just leave me alone and we'll be fine. But the problem is a Torah life is countercultural, in which you would say, no, I am a servant of Hashem. And a servant is one who's loyal, dependable. A servant is trustworthy. A servant is always honorable in everything they do. So what is the key word for a good servant? Order. Certain actions are right and good and are proven so in time. Even if there are many, that there may be doubt and opposition in the moment, decisions and actions that work out to be right and good affect God's divine will, the divine will in our life. The challenge we face is to be able to discern the divine will in the present without the benefit of hindsight. That the extension of this challenge is to align yourself to the will of God in all things. Meaning, everything that I do, all the order that I bring into my life has one purpose. Sure, it's great bringing order to make better money, to become a better businessman, a better father, a better husband, whatever. But the main focus is to bring order so that I can serve Hashem. And that is the secret to bringing order. We look at ourselves and we say, what can we do to become a faithful servant? As a faithful servant, I don't shuck off what I need to do today. I'm honorable, and I'm going to do what I say. My yes is going to be yes and no, no. And with that, I pray that Hashem gives you the ability to develop higher order of your spiritual life and also your physical life for your great success and prosperity. That concludes this shiur, and we'll go on to Q&A right now.